Hello, grade 11 and 12 students. My name is Matthew Kennedy. I run a business in Kenora called Upriver Media Incorporated, and I make videos and take pictures and handle marketing for various businesses online. I do a lot of digital marketing, and I use a lot of math for my business. All the time, when I thought about it, I realized I do use math all the time. The main way that I use math is I have to do a lot of quotes for clients to tell them how much it's going to cost to make a video. So I have to think about the hours involved, the travel involved, the editing hours involved, the cost of a music license. So I have to do a lot of math for that, and writing, because I have to write a proposal to go with the budget. When I'm invoicing a client, again, I have to calculate the tax. I have to add up all the hours, apply my fees to that before I send it to the client. Another way that I use math a lot is when I'm flying my drone, because I need to know my distance from the drone, the height of the drone, the speed the drone is moving, and certainly the drones are smart and they tell me all that information, but math still comes into calculating, how long it's going to take if it's moving that speed for it to get from A to B and things like that. I have to use math when I'm thinking about how much space a video file is going to occupy on the card, on my camera when I'm shooting, or on my hard drives while I'm editing. One of the cameras that I use when I'm doing two angles at once, which I'll usually do for an interview, I'll shoot two angles so that I can cut between them in editing. But when I use a second camera, I usually use this digital SLR camera. It's a Panasonic GH5, and it matches well with my Panasonic cinema camera, since they're both Panasonics. But a lot of the time when you're using a SLR camera, you have to think about the shutter speed versus the frame rate. So I have to think about the shutter speed being twice that of the frame rate to make motion appear in a normal way. For what we're used to seeing on film when we watch a movie or something, it makes like this smooth motion blur that is pleasing to the eye. But I always have to think about, okay, what frame rate am I shooting at, and what is double that frame rate, and that's what my shutter speed should be set to. So if I'm setting my shutter speed on this, most of the time what I'm setting it to is about 50, because my frame rate is usually about 24 frames a second. Technically, double 24 would be a shutter speed of 48, but typically the electronic shutter speed of these cameras can only get as close as 50. Another way I can get around it is setting it to 180 degree shutter. That's math too. 180 degrees means that the shutter is half of a circle, and that is what a shutter is in a standard film camera. It's a 180 degree shutter that's spinning around and exposing the film 24 times in a second. So that is another way I can set it to give me the natural looking motion of a film camera, which is what I usually go for because I like my videos to look cinematic. When I'm shooting on my cinema camera, and I guess on the SLR camera, I'll do a lot of high frame rate shooting. So normally the standard frame rate for a movie is 24 frames a second, so it's shooting basically 24 pictures in 1 second and then connecting them all together to create what looks like a motion picture. But when you shoot something at a high frame rate, so if I shoot on this camera at like 240 frames a second, and then I play that clip back at 24 frames a second, it's a very slow motion video. So I have to think about how slow I want that slow motion to be, and therefore how much higher than 24 frames a second I want to make it. And there's kind of specific looks that you sometimes want to accomplish. Like if I want it to only be half as slow as normal video, I would set it to 48 frames a second, because that would be double 24 frames a second. So when it's played back later at 24 frames a second and was shot at 48 frames, it's going to play half the speed, because there were double the amount of frames shot for every second. But now it's being played back at 24. It's confusing, but that's math. 60 frames a second, that's what I'll often shoot in. as well if I want it just a little bit slower than half speed, because obviously 30, double 30 is 60, double 24 is 48, so it's going to be even slower than half speed. And those are kind of the frame rates I stick to, but then when I really want to go crazy with slow motion, I'll turn it up to 120 frames a second or 240 frames a second, and then you've got like very noticeable dramatic slow motion, which I like to save for stuff like, you know, a boat driving really fast so you can see the water shooting up in the air very slow when you play it back at 24 frames a second, somebody jumping into the water, anything that's kind of like a high speed action shot. It's going to look pretty cool if I shoot it on this at 240 frames a second. And I also have to do my books. So when I'm doing my books to prepare them for my accountant to do my corporate tax returns, math, nonstop math. So get good at math and you can one day be a millionaire just like me.